looking for escapism, I just want to escape.
Welcome back to my disembodied and slightly hungover voice. And, more importantly, welcome back to part 2 of our video essay series on psychological defense mechanisms. Now, we have 6 to get through today, so after a quick recap of what a defense mechanism is, we're going to get stuck in as there's a lot to deal with. If you haven't seen part 1, please go and watch it first, as it offers a lot more depth and introduction. But for those who have seen part 1 already, as ever, let's crack on. So, the purpose of a psychological defense mechanism is because humans are stated to exist in a state of perpetual conflict between the needs and constraints of various parts of the personality. So, therefore, we can endure, but we cannot escape. And when we are under pressure, we can exhibit vicissitudes of instincts, the transformation of the personality and expression of behaviour as a form of psychological symptoms. And psychological defence mechanisms are needed because at times we distort the reality around us to help us cope with the stressful situation we are experiencing and alleviate one or more of the 3 types of anxiety that we suffer from. So, number 1, moral anxiety, a fear of violating our own moral principles. Number 2, neurotic anxiety, the unconscious worry that we will lose control of the id's urges, resulting in punishment for the inappropriate behaviour. Number 3, reality anxiety, fear of real-world events. The cause of this anxiety is usually easily identified, and the most common way of reducing the anxiety is to avoid the threatening object. Like I said before, there's a much deeper dive in part 1 into all of these things, how they interact and how they interplay into psychological defense mechanisms. But if you've seen part 1 and you're still here, we're just going to get right into the grit of it now. So let's crack on with our next defense mechanism on our list, which is fantasy. Avoidance of conflicts by creating imaginary scenarios which satisfy our demands and desires. And for fantasy, we're going to take our old friend Anakin Skywalker from the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Now, we're sticking to the prequels because this is where Anakin is at his most vulnerable. And when we come to the sequels, or the original trilogy as it's known, he is a fully fledged Darth Vader and things have changed. But in the prequels, he is dealing with being a young man and all the pressures that bring. He's also lonely and conflicted between his religion, the Jedi, and his love, Padme. He's also upset by his mother's death and under enormous pressure from Obi-Wan, Chancellor Palpatine, and, when she falls pregnant, also Padme. So, conflicted by all 3 states of anxiety, moral in terms of choosing Padme over the monastic Jedi, neurotic, that he will lose control of everything and lose Padme like he lost his mother, and also reality anxiety, which can be manifested through Obi-Wan's sporadic disappointment and not achieving the rank of Jedi Master. Anakin's brain is just a soup of anxiety which is primed to crack at any minute. Although none of this anxiety is his fault, as he was taken by a cult member when he was a vulnerable child and then separated from his mother who he adored, not to mention the issues with growing up as a slave and having scant resources when he used to work for Otto, Anakin has lots of neurotic anxiety as well as reality anxiety. However, when he falls in love with Padme, he forms a very strong bond with her and, aware he is breaking the Jedi code by sleeping with her, he gets even more anxiety as he has to cover up a pregnancy and then gets Chancellor Palpatine offering him methods of eternal life when a real life anxiety surfaces, the anxiety of, as I said, losing a loved one such as Padme, and all this becomes a major source of paranoia. However, when at his most vulnerable in Attack of the Clones, after killing the Sand People and grieving for his mother, Anakin's gullibility, desperation, and fantasy thinking spiral after slaughtering the Sand People. It's here that he first predicts he'll become the greatest Jedi of them all, and then, in Episode 3, when he is seduced by the dark side of the Force, he uses fantasy as a method of convincing himself he can save Padme without inquiring how this ability is done or questioning the motives of the evil head-turning Palpatine. He has already lost his mother and, even though he doesn't know what this gift of keeping people from dying will cost him, he just attaches it to the imagination and the defense mechanism of being so powerful that he will have control over life and death. Even when he's about to fight Obi-Wan at the end of episode 3 and force choking Padme, he tells Padme that only his new powers can save her, without ever truly understanding what these new powers are. And, a child through and through, despite living inside an adult's skin, he uses fantasy to cope with the agonizing anxiety of his own reality, because deep down, Anakin is just a child, and finding ways to cope with all the emotional pressure of Palpatine and the Jedi is causing him immense trauma. And when people live in trauma, their defense mechanisms react accordingly. He even tells Obi-Wan about, "My new empire will bring order to the galaxy," and he believes that he'll be the one leading it and he will be the one shaping the universe, whilst, in truth, he's just Palpatine's lackey and only being seduced by Palpatine because, whilst Palpatine needs an apprentice, he also knows Anakin may become too strong for him. So, whilst Anakin may well be arrogant and delusional, all of Anakin's self-belief comes from fantasy and what he believes he will be able to control as he ascends with godlike powers without truly understanding things or even knowing how he will control life and death. The lure of the very fantasy of being so powerful is what drives Anakin on, as losing Padme would be his absolute end. And the biggest example of his fantasy is, as I mentioned before, when confronted with the agonising guilt of slaughtering a whole village of Sand People as well as grieving for his mother, Anakin comes to terms with his anger by projecting a fantasized image that he'll be the most powerful Jedi of them all as a method to blot out the guilt and anxiety of what he has done and the fact that he's now grieving. Anakin might well be quite adept with a lightsaber, but his mind isn't set up to the pressure of such responsibility as being a Jedi, and neither can it deal with his own impulsivity. So, as power fantasy is Anakin's defense mechanism, it's no wonder really that he was seduced by the dark side of the Force. Anyway, our next defense mechanism. Idealization, attributing unrealistic qualities to the self or others. And for this defense mechanism, we're going to choose Morpheus from the original Matrix film. Now, Morpheus was a tenuous choice for me because he believes in destiny, fate, and determinism, and is waiting for the one to come along, so thus, his belief is more of a philosophy than a defense mechanism. Then I came to think about religion, and as many people still place faith in books like the Bible, which were written over 2,000 years ago and which now have very little relevance on current society, scientific studies, or the modern day belief system, people still place a wholly idealized yet flawed logic in the capability and capacity of religion and the facts which they assume to ease themselves through a crisis or to help engender a belief system which helps them cope. Anyway, back to Morpheus, and he is searching for the one who will end the war between the humans and the machines, because that's what the Oracle told him he would do. Morpheus wants freedom for Zion and Zion to prosper and not live in fear or oppression from the machines, as he sees the Matrix as slavery, despite the Matrix offering a much more hospitable simulation than the reality which Morpheus lives in. After all, on the Nebuchadnezzar, all they do is eat slop and feel cold as they traverse the ruined earth and search for the one. Then, one day, Morpheus finds Keanu Reeves, or Neo as he's known in the film, and knows he has found the one. Now, his belief in Neo is confirmed because it's who Trinity falls in love with, and Trinity is told that her destiny is to fall in love with the one. Anyway, living in a desolate wasteland where all of humanity is enslaved and sentinels can wipe you out at any moment, you would need hope, and as hope is the postulation that the future will be better than the present without any contrary evidence to suggest things are going to improve, it's no wonder that all of Morpheus's reality anxiety is tested on a day-to-day basis. So, when he finally meets Neo, he immediately attributes him with godlike status, even though there is no evidence apart from the belief in his own personal Jesus, the Oracle, and the fact that Trinity quite fancies him. Morpheus is convinced that Neo will save them, and time again, tells Neo that when the time is right, he will bend all reality to his whim and end the war. Now, we know what happens at the end of The Matrix, and if you haven't, sorry, spoilers, but Neo does become the One. But Morpheus places so much blind faith and idealization in this young man that it's akin to a teenage girl giving her life, devotion and love to a member of One Direction, even though she's never met this person and all she has is their music. Neo shows no inclination that he is the one. He fails the tests that Morpheus puts in front of him, and Morpheus even sacrifices himself during their escape from the Matrix, which then prompts Neo and Trinity to go back in and rescue him with guns. Lots of guns. But Morpheus's belief is so situated within Neo being the One that he will actually and willingly lay down his own life. Such is this attributing idealization and godlike qualities and expectations upon poor Neo, who, throughout much of the film, looks completely bemused. Going back to the apocalypse, Morpheus has had a rough time. Freed from his simulation and brought into the real world, the perpetual threat of annihilation and oppressive machines means that his own psyche is damaged, and this is why he believes in this philosophy, as, per the principles of hope, that the future will be better than the present without any evidence to support that, the current reality offers no future or positives beyond changing the current dynamic. And Morpheus places this idealization that Neo will be the one that changes this dynamic and ends the war. So, as philosophy is Morpheus's belief system, much as religion is for people who suffer horrific ordeals but without evidence will believe that their suffering is all part of God's plan, when Morpheus finds Neo, the man that Trinity wants to doink, then his entire mental schemata, belief system, attributes, and overall interpretation of the world is placed into this idealization of Neo, and, to simplify things even more, he sees Neo as something so wonderful and amazing that, when Agent Smith kills him at the end of the film, before Neo comes back to life, Morpheus's world and mental state collapses upon his belief being proved wrong, although being proved wrong briefly, I have to admit. Idealization is often used in the real world by abused people who then fall in love with someone that they see as a rescuer, but then, when that person goes on to abuse them, they can't let go of it. It's also used in celebrity crushes because when someone is idealized, we remove rational context and are unable to separate our godlike perception, or massive crush, to the fact of who these people really are, because deep down, they are just like you and me. They have faults, they have smelly poos in the morning, their tummies gurgle, they burp after a meal, and they make general mistakes like everyone does. Morpheus could never doubt Neo, because his perception that Neo is the one means that Morpheus places every single thing he has into him, and Morpheus is even willing to die for this cause, because his philosophy and delusional defense mechanisms mix into something nebulous, and, regardless of Neo being the one, his idealization distorts reality and places him in lots of danger when he does sacrifice himself and get captured, as well as being an area for massive disappointment that, had Neo not come back to life, he would never have recovered from. Anyway, our next defense mechanism: isolation of effect. Conflict is diffused by separating ideas from effects, thus retaining an awareness of intellectual or factual aspects, but losing touch with the threatening emotions. In other words, and to put it more simply, you remove the emotion from what is causing conflict inside of you. One example for this would be killing an animal and not seeing its distress or emotional state. It's something abattoir workers have to do when slaughtering cattle, pigs and chickens. You can't think of an animal as a living and sensitive creature. It's just a product, you have to kill it, and that's your job. It's basically numbing out the distressing reality and looking at something as pragmatic, cold, or necessary. And for this mechanism, I had to think long and hard, but in the end, I came back to one scene which encapsulates it perfectly, and that is when Thanos kills...
Why is Gamora?
Now, Thanos will need isolation of effect because he intends to kill half of all life forms in the universe, which is mass genocide, but perhaps the one time where we see him do this and he removes his emotions most is when he needs the Soul Stone, so he throws...
Why is Gamora?
off a cliff to make sure that sacrifice gets him his reward. It's a powerful moment as you can see the facial determination and horror of grabbing his daughter and dragging her to a painful and miserable death, one he is causing by hurling her off a rocky edge onto a not-so-soft landing, but he needs the stone to complete his masterpiece, to complete his work. So, despite his cruelty and megalomaniacal philosophy, Thanos shows he has a heart, and his anxiety and trauma from seeing his home planet get destroyed has left him with emotional and mental scars, and now, as he has to kill his daughter, the reality and neurotic anxiety sees the mad Titan traumatized as he drags.
Why is Gamora?
Now, there are massive elements of narcissism for Thanos in terms of how he was ridiculed when he suggested his lottery of genocide on Titan, but as he now sees the stones as getting his life work done at any cost, he kidnaps.
Why is Gamora?
And takes her to Vormir. Then, at the very point where he must kill her, his face just stares into space, he cannot make eye contact, and he marches towards the edge of the cliff with,
Why is Gamora?
Screaming and begging before throwing her into the abyss and seeing her head crack and her death occur. See how Thanos' face isn't showing anything apart from focus and determination, and how he only looks ahead as if he looks at,
Why is Gamora?
Then he may have an emotional crisis his plan can't afford. He needs the Soul Stone and he must kill.
Why is Gamora?
So when he does, he has to remove the emotion, and you can almost see his mind just blotting out the horror and thinking, this is the mission. This is the mission. This is the mission, as he murders his beloved child. It's a truly brilliant scene, and it shows you that sometimes when we have to do difficult things, we need to remove the emotion and the conflict. Otherwise, the act would send our anxiety over the edge and cause us such distress, anxiety and upset that we would end up overwhelmed by the trauma. Anyway, on to our next defense mechanism. Omnipotence. An actual image of oneself as incredibly powerful, intelligent, or superior is created to overcome threatening eventualities or feelings. And this one was easy, as soon as I read it, I thought of one person, well, two people I suppose, and that's the narrator and Tyler Durden from Fight Club. Oh, and if you haven't seen Fight Club, big spoilers ahead. Now, I'm sure that Brad Pitt's casting in Fight Club was more than just his amazing audition, because, let's be honest, if you wanted to project an idealised and omnipotent version of the self and you wanted to look like an ideal specimen of man, then looking like Brad Pitt in Fight Club is a damn good place to start. After all, bronzed, gorgeous, able to take a punch, abs you can grate cheese off, and a supersized ego is the kind of stuff dowdy and downtrodden men fantasise about having. For the narrator, played by Edward Norton, he's stuck in a dead-end job and living an empty life of consumerism and going nowhere fast. He attends groups as a form of therapy, but hates his life and isn't the biggest fan of himself. Now, as we all know now, the narrator and Durden are the same person, but the narrator would never have been able to do all the things he does, such as quit his job, get beaten to a pulp every night, or sleep with Helena Bonham Carter if he didn't have an omnipotent personality who looked like Brad Pitt, had abs you could grate cheese off, and generally was just stunningly egotistical and beautiful. Now, there is the possibility to discuss that Durden is part of a dissociative identity disorder, but in terms of reality and moral anxiety, the narrator is so swamped by the pressures of life and a desire to be someone else that his alter ego is forged in the fires of a defense mechanism, because he wouldn't be able to cope with his anxiety or the reality of who he was if there wasn't an alter ego who was superior to him in every way. Durden enables the narrator to alleviate his anxiety and become something much more than just himself, and to do this, be it dissociative identity disorder or not, he needs a persona which is breathtakingly bold and a complete opposite to the downtrodden person that he is. Now, making an omnipotent version of the self doesn't have to be about looking like Brad Pitt. Many online gamers and keyboard warrior trolls do this on a daily basis, as they can be something strong and omnipotent when hiding behind their monitors or in their virtual worlds of gaming, or when they're slandering celebrities on Twitter, because when dealing with moral and neurotic anxiety, Forming an alter image where you are strong and the polar opposite of who you are in real life is liberating because, let's say you're the king of Fortnite, you might spend your day getting bullied at school or feeling like a loser in your job, but when your gamer personality takes over, you feel invincible. And whilst the narrator forms a radical group and intends to blow up buildings and take things to the extreme, he would never be able to get there and do all these things without the construct which enables him to take a punch or lose all the anxiety that the consumerist world gives him. The narrator needs Tyler Durden, and that is why Durden is the perfect, omnipotent defense mechanism. Anyway, next defense mechanism please, and it's projection. Unacceptable emotions or personal qualities are disowned by attributing them to others. And this one's going to require a really niche character, and forgive the incoming still shots, but I get torn down for copyright when I use footage. But I'm going to talk about Albert Nimziki, or better known as the Secretary of Defense, from the movie Independence Day. Okay, considering the film is about an alien invasion and the end of humanity, Nimziki is probably the closest thing to a human villain in the film. And that's the magic of Independence Day, because for all the destruction and death, there isn't a rogue gang or corrupt humans siding with the aliens anywhere to be seen. It's just a disparate and desperate set of survivors, be they a stripper or the president himself, trying to find a way to survive. So when it comes to Nimziki, we get a duplicitous, nasty and deceptive little creep who irks President Bill Pullman throughout the whole movie. First of all, as he is the Secretary of Defense, his answer is to shoot everything. Target some ICBMs to blow it out the sky, and then, when it comes to nuclear war suggestions, he belittles the president for delaying a reaction in evacuating the cities when President Bill Pullman is rightly resisting Nimziki's pressure to nuke the bastards. Then, right at the end, Nimziki downright destroys, teases and poo-poos the plan to hack the aliens with an Apple laptop and fly a 40-year-old out-of-date craft into their mothership. Anyway, plot holes aside, the reason Nimziki is like this and acts like this is because he is useless, a liar, a deceptive little traitor, and responsible for the death of hundreds of American soldiers. Nimziki knew about Area 51 and the Roswell craft and said nothing even when the aliens first arrived. Watch his face during the scene when Will Smith and the soldiers get creamed in the first assault on the alien ship. This is before we know about Area 51, but obviously he does, and you can clearly see he knew all along that this attack might not work, but his awful judgment and snivelling deception lets everyone fly in and get killed. Like I said, you can see it in his face when you watch the movie when the missiles don't go through. He doesn't seem surprised. It's almost a grim realisation that he should have said something. So, as his shoot them plans are always rubbished, and his lies compromise the military, and his obsessive nuclear plan is rubbished by President Bill Pullman, he projects all his low self-esteem and blame for the situation onto President Bill Pullman or anyone else of substance. He blames President Bill Pullman for not evacuating when he could have urged this when the aliens arrived, as he already knew about them. He could have stopped the strike and stated the aliens might have shields, but he doesn't, and instead, as there are so many dead pilots and a fading human resistance to the aliens, he projects his guilt and failings onto those who are trying and either don't know about Area 51 or who are just trying to find solutions. And to ease his moral and neurotic anxiety, it's everyone else who is garbage and every other plan which is a bad idea, and, in the end, it's the rather aggressive turning on him which rejects that projection and shows President Bill Pullman has found his spine and his testicles and is now ready to refuse all that projection and guilt he has had to carry for the whole film and do what's right to save planet Earth. Nimziki is a weasel and, rather than apologise or approach President Bill Pullman with some solutions and insight, he keeps stum, causes many deaths, and then deals with this by belittling and blaming others who are trying to find real solutions and practical solutions as the aliens are rapidly liquidizing the human race. People who project never take responsibility and always lack the self-awareness to realise that they are in the wrong. They just alleviate their own anxiety by placing the fault onto someone else. And with that, we come to our final defence mechanism, which is a form of projection, but is a little bit more specific and is called projective identification. Unpleasant feelings and reactions are not only projected onto others, but also retained in awareness and viewed as a reaction to the recipient's behaviour. So, in layman's terms, if we were to take the above example of Nimziki, he would project his unpleasant guilt and inadequacies onto someone, but then blame that person for his own inexcusable behaviour and attribute all his faults to that person when they had nothing to do with it. And for our final defence mechanism in today's video, we're going to look at something very specific: domestic abusers. Now, I could look at James in Tyrannosaur or Sadie's husband in A Vigilante, but instead we're going to look at someone who only gets about 3 minutes of screen time in the opening scene of the incredibly poor film The Girl in the Spider's Web, where the awesome Claire Foy plays a dreadful Lisbeth Salander. Now, the film opens with a man apologising to his wife, and as the camera pans down, we see that she has a bloodied face and is cowering in fear. The husband then states he's sorry, but blames her for the way she talks to him and how she makes him upset. And this is the pivotal point of interest when it comes to projective identification, because for domestic abusers, they don't hate their partners. They hate themselves. And their way of dealing with this low self-esteem and self-hatred and the anger which they hold towards the people who they feel made them this way is to take their self-hatred, anxiety and conflict and turn it through the vicissitudes of instincts by letting it become symptomatic rage. However, to protect them from the moral anxiety of what they are doing, and also to justify it, as seeing someone in a bloodied state can be quite upsetting, they will blame their abhorrent behaviour on their partner by attributing all their worthlessness onto them and then reacting to the object and beating it. In other words, they have lots of low self-esteem and poor qualities. They project those poor qualities onto the partner. They then beat the partner. But then, on top of all that, they will say, it's your bad qualities that I gave you which have made me do this. The cycle then becomes complete when they apologise and blame said partner for making them angry or causing them to lash out. Their self-hate and rage is retained by awareness, but also used to deny the conflict and anxiety by blaming their victims. And, although the scene in The Girl in the Spider's Web is mere minutes in length, the unpleasant man who is now making his wife a drink and commencing the reparation cycle most domestic abusers go through is the perfect example of someone using projective identification, because he has the problem, but he will blame his behaviour on her because he views her behaviour as the trigger when it's nothing to do with her. It's all down to him. She has absorbed his projected low self-esteem and negative qualities, and he's blaming her for it. The line where he apologises but blames his wife is perfect, and why I chose this character. Because before Lisbeth humiliates him and gives his fortune to his wife, it's a scene which perfectly exemplifies projective identification, because it's what domestic abusers use. And when he says, it's the way you talk to me, he's not saying that. He's saying, I'm worthless, I'm a piece of dirt, I'm a piece of crap, but actually you are, and the reason that you are a piece of dirt and crap is because you wind me up and I can't help it, but you deserve it because you've got my faults. Like I said, it's only about 3 minutes long, the entire scene, but I think it's really good. It's a shame the rest of the film didn't live up to the quality. Anyway, that's it for this week's video. The third and final part of Defense Mechanisms is coming soon, but until then, remember that psychology is cool. So please like, share and subscribe, or even leave a comment or a suggestion for a future video. And as ever, until next time, I'll catch you later.
Sorry I said those things. You know how much I love you, don't you?